Okay, we're gonna just showcase a couple of things today. And Lisa, if you want to make your way up here, the first thing that we're going to talk about is Canada Day, and I'm gonna let Lisa talk about that.
Thanks, Donna. Well, actually, it's not so much about Canada Day, but I was struck as I was watching all the photos that are flipping by in the background on the screen here. I was impressed with all the images of WURST and what it looked like just about a year ago today. And I think many of the people in this room, based on what I saw on social media, were just like me. You were out in the communities trying to help with cleanup. And I think back to a year from now and how blown away I was. I remember being in Sunnyside helping with cleanup and actually getting irritated at the sheer number of people that were coming up and offering to feed us as we tried to clean. And we'd say, no, please just let us get back to work. Because that's the spirit in Calgary. That's how good we are at giving back and how important it is to us to look after our neighbors and to build a stronger community. That there was actually too many people trying to help out in some of the communities. So it's with that spirit that I'm here to talk to you today, and in part because Canada Day is fast approaching, and I wanted to plant a little seed and hope that it takes root and grows into something bigger by the time we get around to Canada Day. So I'm here today on behalf of an organization called Imagination 150, and it was formed because in 2017 Canada will hit its 150th birthday. It's a major birthday and a major milestone. A quick show of hands, how many people in the room were around for 67 when the country turned 100? Not very many. Yeah. So I wasn't either, but the second I talked to people that were, they tell me amazing stories of how Canadians gave back during that time. They rolled up their sleeves and they started projects all across the country and within their communities, and whether it was community gardens or statues erected or parks created or just ridiculous things like bathtub races and competitions, they did an amazing job of looking at what their communities needed and giving back to it. And so that's what my organization is about. We've formed here in Calgary. We're building a national network of other chapters across the country. And our work is entirely focused on challenging Canadians to think about what's the Canada that you want. Think about this country 150 years from now, or even 50 if 150 is too long. What does that country look like? And what's one thing that you could do to take us closer to it? So there's a website coming in future months that will allow people to put a bit of information up and take a pledge to give a gift to their country on this major birthday. But for now, knowing that Canada Day is coming, my challenge to you today is to start thinking a little bit about what you, or what the brands or the organizations that you represent as social media ambassadors, what could they start doing to do something that is big enough and amazing enough for their country on its 150th birthday. So really, it's and Donna's giving me the nod here, so I'm going to wrap up. But I will say, I turned 35 this year, and so for Canadian citizens, for people on those 5s and 0s, you usually take a minute and you think a bit about, okay, who am I today, and where do I want to go next, and then how am I going to get there? And so if there's one thing that you take away today, I hope that you start to think about, on Canada's 150th, who will we be, and where can we go next, and how do we get there? Anyway, thank you. Oh, and one more thing. So I'm going to be incredibly rude and dash out, but I had a really greedy reason for coming here today, and it's that we have a phenomenal social media team right now. It's completely volunteer-driven. They've helped build us up to something like 12,000 followers, and because there's been such a great response online, we've been searching for additional members for the team and for people to help figure out what our strategy looks like going forward. So we've got a strategy session coming up in a couple of weeks, and I have an open invitation to folks here in the room. If you think you'd like to gather with us for a couple of hours and toss some ideas around about how you engage the entire country online through social media, we'd love to have you in the room to help us hash out that strategy. And you could just send an email to us at info@i150 and we will send you more details. Anyway, I'll let you get on to the real meat of the speakers today. Thank you.
And I can tell you, if you think you examine your life at 35, I turned 50 this year. It goes exponentially after that. Who's next? Laura, are you here? So in conjunction with the flood this weekend, the anniversary this weekend, there's a lot of events going on, and Laura's going to come and talk to us about one that's happening actually right across the street in the Safeway parking lot.
Hi, I'll keep this quick. So at 11, there'll be a free barbecue at the Mission Safeway. It's put on by Chorus Entertainment, and they'll be interviewing people. You can share your flood stories and how it impacted you and your experiences with it. And then there'll also be some interviews on location, possibly Nenshi or the police chief for Kansan. So if you have time to check it out, head on over. The radio crews will be there till 6 p.m. today. So yeah, you can check it out. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura. There's going to be a lot of events this weekend, and I encourage you guys to take advantage of that. Now we're going to do one more. And this is everybody's hearing CASL. It actually stands for Canada's new anti-spam law. And there is an organization in town that saw that there was a void for actually tracking information for what you're doing with CASL and your subscribers. So I'm going to let Amanda tell you about that. Holy cow.
Hi everyone. So who was at the social media breakfast last month where we talked about Canada's new anti-spam laws? And I was there, and it seems like everybody left feeling stressed out. Good. Yeah. So I work with a team, and we've actually developed a tool to help people manage some of this stress and help make it easy. So what we've done is our tool, it will take all of your contacts, and it does automated consent management. So it tracks when your contacts are going to expire and will automatically reach out to them and request consent. So at any time, you can feel comfortable knowing that you have an email list that's not only optimized with the most number of people you can contact at any given time, but also know that they're all people that are safe to contact. So if you go onto our website, caslsafe.ca, we're actually just in pre-release right now. So if you register on our website, we're opening it up for general release early next week. So if you pre-register, you'll be the first to know that it's available. And to go along with that, early next week on Monday and Tuesday, Chaos Consulting and the Connie Law Office, they're putting on some more educational events about what you need to do for CASL and understanding the law and making sure you know what you need to do today. So if you go to the social media breakfast website, SMByyc.com, and go to the events, you can see those events listed there and sign up. Yes, we are. So anybody who comes to the events next week on Monday and Tuesday, we're actually giving away a $100 card for caslsafe.com. So you get a $100 credit for anybody that comes to those events on Monday and Tuesday. And so just one last thing, we just started up our Twitter account this week, CASLSafe, @CASLSafe, so please show us a little bit of love. We'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So, and Amanda makes a good point. There's a lot of people that contribute, whether it's sponsors, speakers, everybody takes time to come and participate. And the best way that you can say thank you is to tweet about them. If they have Facebook pages, find them and like them. And if you ever need their services, or you know somebody that does, if you could recommend them, that would be awesome as well. Just give me a second, and can you go to the next slide, because I forget what it is. Oh, yay. Okay, so I have to tell you that every single person that I said, oh, I don't know what the topic is yet, but we're going to be at WURST, their eyes lit up. We love coming here. And a big shout out to Jeff. I don't know, Jeff, where are you standing? Are you in? Oh, Jeff's right in the back. Jeff is the owner here. And they just opened up another restaurant as well. It's called Bocce, if I remember right. BOECCE, I believe. And it's just down the street, and it's a pizzeria, salads, that sort of thing. And one of the reasons why I wanted to come here this month particularly, and we just did an event on the flood in August, and we don't typically revisit subjects, and especially one that's not so directly related to social media. However, with the mayor declaring tomorrow to be our neighborhood day, and this being literally the Friday 12 months ago, we were scheduled to have social media breakfast at Kingsland Farmers Market, and on Thursday night I was sitting at my house at 9 o'clock at night thinking, what are we gonna do? Like, nobody really knew what was happening. And I remember I had to make a decision, and I made the decision to cancel, because one of the attractive things about Kingsland Farmers Market on McLeod Trail is people can go there by LRT. And I sort of had a feeling that the LRT would actually be down on the Friday. So I canceled it without actually knowing the LRT would literally be blown out of the ground. So it's amazing that it's been a year, and there's so many businesses that have been hit by the flood, but WURST was one of the ones that we had been here before. We'd experienced what this room was like, experienced the food and the hospitality, and then they were hit so hard. And if you, we've had this slideshow going in the last half hour, but I'm not sure if you want to just scroll through the next 4 slides, just stop each one for a minute. Jeff gave me a couple of pictures of what they experienced when just after the flood. So they had a lot of cleanup to do, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that. But really, really want to thank him for welcoming us and for the hospitality and for the work that they did to actually come back from the flood. Okay, so I think that the next thing we're going to move into is the panel. So you guys, are you mic'd? Okay, so I'm just going to do a couple of introductions and then the panel will start the discussion. When we had our panel on the flood in August, I had reached out to Ken Lima-Coho to see if he would moderate the panel, and he did a great job. So when we decided to do this again, I contacted him and asked him if he would again participate, and I'm very glad that he said yes. He has, I don't know, how many of you know that he sings? How many know Ken? If you've met him, how many know that he sings? He's amazing. They have, he's one of the founding members of the Heebie-Jeebies, and he just clarified for me that last year they played the grandstand, but they played on the grounds at the Stampede last year, and they did 45 shows. They were approached this year, they said they'd only do 1. 45 was a little bit much. He right now is the communications, the VP of communications at YMCA, and he was formerly on the board of directors there. Bottom line, the man's a storyteller, and he's had 20 years of experience. He was at the CBC prior to that, and we're just really glad to have you here, Ken. Another person that we thought would be interesting to have on the panel was somebody that would represent Alberta Health Services. Maybe EMS is one that we actually decided we would try, and we found somebody right away. Scott Holland and we owe Scott this huge apology, because if you got the press release from MarketWire, through MarketWire, his name was actually wrong in there. And we have this rule that everybody has to proof a press release. Every person has to proof their own information on a press release, and every time we skip that part, we make a huge mistake, and we skipped it this time. And so he is in fact not Scott Hamilton, he is Scott Holland. And one of the fascinating things for me, and there's lots I could say about Scott, but when I called and talked to him, found out that he just spent just prior to the flood, he was on a committee that spent 3 years doing, getting together a crisis, I'm not going to use the right word, sorry Scott, emergency medical services, crisis management, what's the word? Plan, that's the word I'm looking for, thank you. And 2 months after they got that plan together, the flood happened. So when I asked him how many, if he could talk about the policy changes that they might have gone through, they actually tested 3 years of theory. And so he's going to address that a little bit today. Okay, so I think that's, so we're happy to have you here, Scott. Emma is a person that, well, when I look at Emma's life, I say she is the perfect example of when you want to get something done, you give it to a busy person. And Emma gets lots done, and she stays very, very busy. She's a realtor, she's a former corporate lawyer, lifelong Calgarian, and she volunteers with a lot of different groups. She's got a degree in English literature, communication studies. She's a member of the Law Society. She's worked with commercial and entertainment law. That's just one page. There's a list of different organizations that she's volunteered with that make you tired reading it. And she has 2 children, and so that says a lot just in itself. right now she is the president of the Calgary River Communities Action Group. So we asked her if she would participate today and talk a little bit about mitigation that's happening. The third person on our committee is, I really wanted to get a perspective from WURST. So WURST is not only, we owe them a big round of applause today. They are not only giving us the venue, they would not let me find a sponsor today. They said they wanted to do this for the social media community, and they agreed that somebody could come on the panel. And so Jeff delegated that to Chris Rosemont, who is the operations manager here. So I sat down with Chris, I haven't actually met Chris before, and found out that his passion is actually acting. So he's been in an episode of Fargo, he's been in an episode of Heartland, he's been in a few episodes of Blackstone that's being done up in Edmonton. He's acted in Vancouver, he's worked in New York, and he works at WURST, and he happened to have the wonderful position of being the general manager here when the flood happened. So he had firsthand experience at the entire rebuild process. So we're really, really grateful that you could be here today just to give us some information about what that process was like. So I think if you guys actually want to come up, I'm going to give the mic over to the floor over to Ken.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Donna. Yeah. Hi, everybody. They're going to just play with knobbies and dials here to make us sound smart. Press the smart button, please. Thank you very much. I love this event because it's casual. We're going to keep it that way. I'm not using a script. I'm not using notes. We're just going to have a chat and talk about what I would like to say was probably one of those moments that we're going to be talking about for the rest of our lives. This is our JFK. This is our Lady Diana. That flood impacted every single person in our community, whether directly or indirectly. How many people in this room were affected in some way by the flood? Put up your hands. So just a straw poll in this very room, that could have been through your business, that could have been through your home, that could have been through some level of inconvenience or some spark that helped you create some connection with your community over time. It was an important time. Social Media Breakfast is fun for me because this is like the only event, strangely, that I don't actually tweet because I'm talking. So please, I know you know the drill, but tweet like crazy. The hashtag is somewhere. Hashtag SMByyc 53 because we've done 52 before. I'm going to start with just a quick story for myself. Like we said, everybody's been affected. A year ago, I was just coming out of journalism. I worked at CBC for 15 years, and I just joined the team at the YMCA. And just a few weeks into my tenure there, we were ostensibly 1 year ago today, the YMCA was hosting its annual Strong Kids, that's our annual fundraiser to help kids use the Y. We were holding our golf tournament. Well, I gotta say, nobody played. It was very wet. We actually ended up, just given an amazing community we've got around the YMCA, we actually held the banquet part of our golf tournament even though it was completely washed out as an actual day of play. And we actually made our goal because people were just in a generous spirit already, and that was indicative of what we saw later. A few minutes later, we got a call from Calgary Emergency Management saying, you have to shut down your Eau Claire facility, and by the way, everybody head to Shaughnessy, you might be running an evacuation center. And for the next 4 days, myself, some of my team who are here today, and a whole bunch of hundreds of volunteers, staff members, and community members helped 300 long-term care seniors through a very difficult period, sleeping on yoga mats, trying to figure out how to go to the bathroom. You can imagine how difficult it would be. That is just my story, and there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of others, and we're going to explore some of them today. So I wanted to start with by asking the same question of each of you. Emma, take yourself back a year. Was there one moment in the flood event, during the actual front of the crisis, that's really indicative of how you were feeling, what you were going through? Can you take me back to one particular story that really just, and maybe it hurts a little to tell it?
That's actually a hard question because for my life it's been everything sort of reactive post-flood. So to go back, you know, my own house was hit, but we didn't suffer too much damage. We had some basement damage. So I remember coming back down into the basement and we thought we dodged the bullet actually because a bunch of my neighbor behind me, his whole main floor was wiped out underwater. And then we got into our house and it was dry. So we were like, oh my God, we're dry. But by 5 p.m. on Friday, the water started coming in and things started coming out. And, a bunch of our friends came over and we hauled everything out and started doing that. And then we went from house to house to house along the block. My husband got a old beater truck, and they had all the hoses and generators, and he developed a little tag team. And they went. The first house they went to actually was this neighbor lady. And I think she was like 70 years old, and she was just standing there looking in her basement in East Elmo Park, and it was full. And it was her whole life, like all of her kids, all the memorabilia, all of the family photo albums. And Trevor said, hey, do you need help? And she's like, no. no, I'm fine. And he's like, I'm not sure you're fine. Like, I think we need to get in there. So they got it, she finally consented, and they got in and, literally like stripped this woman's basement out. I think it took them the whole day, and then and cleaned it and sprayed it. But I mean, I just remember the community, everybody kind of going tag teaming and going from house to house to house. I mean, I think we were kind of in shock at the time. So to be honest, I don't have that many awesome recollections. There wasn't a whole lot of reflection happening at the time. Like there really wasn't.
Yeah. Scott, you put a plan together. Holy smokes, time to test the plan. What was that first few minutes or days like when you were thinking, this just became something other than theoretical?
Well, we had activated it a couple times prior to for smaller events, and the plan itself wasn't anything that was overly revolutionary. It was just an amalgamation of 44 ambulance services across the province. Now we can all respond as a provincial system as opposed to individual ambulance services kind of responding to the same event. But now we can use our resources provincially in a more coordinated way. So that was interesting. But my day actually started at 4 in the morning on the day of the flood. When we got a call from Canmore EMS saying we need to activate the emergency management plan, and this is what's going on. And by 8 o'clock in the morning, I was in the emergency coordination center for Alberta EMS, and we had all of the players at the table. Everyone was there, so it was interesting seeing the plan come to life, where you would have theory, and you just finished training 4,000 people across the province in this one plan. And some of my colleagues in emergency management that are quite a bit older than me would say that I've been in emergency management for 30 years or whatever, and I've never activated my plan. And good luck as you go forward activating your plan. And then of course we had the event. So it was overwhelming for me because we were seeing this theory come to life, but at the same time we knew we had a job to do as first responders, and we knew that the water that started in Canmore was eventually going to come to Calgary. So we didn't have a lot of time to ramp up, but we did feel a little bit comforted by the fact that we had a plan and we had a provincial system to be able to rely upon. Our friends in BC, our friends in Saskatchewan, all called us very early on and offered assistance. And we had resources coming in from Edmonton, coming in from south of Alberta as well. And it was comforting to see that people understood our plan, we understood their plans. We're working with the municipality and other partners to make it happen. But at the same time, so it was that bittersweet, that push and pull between, the plan is working, or is it going to work? There was kind of that little bit of trepidation, but then seeing everything come together was comforting.
Chris, what did it smell like down here a year ago?
Well, I was basically the first one here. I was the one who took that first photo off the balcony, and it wasn't a pleasant smell, to say the least. I guess you kind of got used to it.
What goes through your mind when you well, that photo says it all. What went through your mind when you saw your place?
Well, ironically, I was the first one here. I hip waded in on this Saturday. Is the first time I could get here. So there was the anticipation of, okay, what am I walking into? And when I got to the building, none of the water had breached our entrances. All the main level, there's 3 businesses here. We were fine. And so I thought, okay, we're okay. The water just sort of flowed around us and went down to and pooled where Earl's and the James Joyce are. And I was like, okay, we're gonna be okay. And I opened up the back door, and right the stairs going down to the kitchen was full completely of water. So then I walked out here and snapped the photo from this corner, and yeah, it was surreal. I didn't know it was, well, what are we gonna do? We didn't have much time, you know. It was like, it went to reflect as well too. It's like we had to react. So we commandeered some pumps and just started pumping water out. And you know, one thing that really, you know, I'll just never forget is just how many volunteers just kept on coming through our doors. It was amazing, unbelievable.
How many people in this room volunteered? Yeah, it says something about our city. I remember one of the moments when Mayor Nenshi called for volunteers, for 600 volunteers, and 8,000 showed up or something. It was pretty incredible. Let's unpack a little bit more from your various perspectives. You've all said in a way that it was overwhelming and it was a reactionary sort of thing. Talk to me a bit more about what that reaction looked like. Emma, it was interesting to me that you said that your husband and a pal just kind of jerry-rigged a system where they were, there was a lot of ingenuity, especially in the river communities. Tell me about that.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember calling him and saying, "We're being evacuated. You got to come home and move stuff." And he's like, "No, I'm going to Home Depot." And drove to Home Depot and I think bought them out of pumps and hoses and all this stuff. He went into MacGyver mode. It's like, oh wow, that's cool. Ingenuity in terms of the community right in that moment.
Yeah, right in that moment. I want to get a sense of, because there was a lot of, nobody could plan for the scale of what happened, especially in those communities. So yeah, MacGyver's a nice metaphor, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a sense that the communities that you're, and I don't want to jump too far forward.
No, it's okay, because most of my stuff happened sort of post all of the flood thing, and I mean, I think I really was in this total daze during the actual flood.
How long did that daze last for you?
About 5 or 6, I think. Yeah, and we ended up going back into our house because I have this old dog, and I was staying at my girlfriend's house, and she's not a dog person, right? He's so he had to be confined to the garage. And he was 13 and he was not happy. So I was like, we are moving home because my dog is going to die in this garage. So we moved home and glamped, right, without power and all of that stuff. And then continued to just go to our neighbors' houses and you just did what you can.
At what moment for you did it become more reactionary on the sort of path forward? At what point did you say, I want to start a group and I want to lead it to sort of fix this mess and work with the governments and actually
Well,
sort
that was
through?
right
How did
after that was right after Doug Griffith's press conference.
Remind us what happened at that press conference.
I think it was July 13th or something like that, and Doug Griffiths came out at the press conference and he announced the government policy. And he basically said, yeah, we're going to give you DRP money, and if you take it, we're putting a caveat on your title, and we're going to stop development in flood areas, and that was it. And we were all kind of like, well, wait a minute. Why is this a homeowner issue? I thought Saddle Dome was underwater. I thought City Hall was underwater. Wasn't the whole city kind of screwed? And so we felt, and then I was wondering, well, why didn't he talk about mitigation too? Why didn't he talk about what are we going to do? Are we going to do something like Winnipeg did? Is this going to be our new reality? And the more I looked into Calgary's history and realized that this was something that we'd gone through from 1876 to 1932, and we had waves of massive floods, in fact some that were 35% bigger than what we have now, I thought, wow, we really actually have to do something about this, so let's start that conversation. So I sent an email to friends and family and clients and basically sort of setting out what I thought some of the policy directives should be that we should be exploring, and it went viral. And we said, okay, well, let's have a meeting. So we booked a meeting, and we had 800 people show up. Yeah, so the meeting was July 23rd, and it was a hot night, and we filled a ballroom, which was insane to me because I thought we were going to have like 25 people come. We had Rick McIver came, Rick Fraser came.
Rick Fraser was the minister assigned.
He was the minister assigned to the floods, and then I can't remember if another minister was there. Joan Crockett came, so a bunch of government folks came, and then Alan Markin came, and Alan had just been appointed by the premier to this flood advisory task force. And my favorite line of his that night was he was like, "Make sure you stay intelligently angry." And I think that was a philosophy that we kind of took forward, right? Like, how do we? So, coming out of that, my goal of the organization was that we always stay solution focused, right? It was a disaster. You can't necessarily, and to imagine the government would have a plan to deal with it is perhaps, I think this has been the scariest thing for me in this whole process, is I always sort of had this vision that there were adults running the world. And there were like these people out there who
EMS
knew,
exempted, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, who knew like what policy, like how to do it. And then I'm like, oh my God, there is no plan. So for me it was, okay, how do we get involved then? How do we shape this plan because all of a sudden government's going to come out with all this stuff that's going to have huge impact on the city, and it's going to have huge impact on my community. And so we got to have a seat at the table. We have to be part of this conversation, because otherwise, shit's just going to happen that might not work. So we ended up, out of that, we had an organization. We've got a board of 5. We set down 3 policy objectives, which were or mandate. Number 1 was seek protection for the city of Calgary from the suffering from the damage of catastrophic flooding. The second was restoration of property loss and value, and the third was making sure that community integrity stays intact. Because as people sort of come and move out of their homes, you see, it's been really hard on communities. And then this turned into, those are 3 very large policy objectives, which I didn't realize really at the time. So,
Scott, we're going to jump around a little bit, but that's kind of the nature of what this flood was like to deal with. Emma's just said that somewhere in the back of our minds, we all hoped and knew and prayed the government had a plan on this. You're with Alberta Health Services. You're part of an arm of government. You had a plan. What went wrong? What surprised you about, where you were finding yourself, and what challenges you came up against? Give us the dirt here. What actually was it like?
Well, because it was the first time we've activated this plan in this nature, of full activation of the plan, it was a lot of learning for us as well. So when you have a provincial system that has 550 ambulances in it, over 4,000 employees from EMR all the way up to paramedic, and what do they do and what is their scope of practice, it's very difficult to get everybody to sing off the same song sheet. So what we generally do is build something what we call all hazards planning. So you don't necessarily plan for a flood or for a fire or for an earthquake. You have to plan for everything. So it's generally what I call the emergency management plan is just it's a guideline for good decision making to occur. It's non-prescriptive. It doesn't say paramedics will do X, Y, and Z when this bad thing happens. It provides a framework for decision making and a support network for everybody there. So one of the things we realized early on in the planning process was that if there is any large-scale event, our staff are going to be impacted as well in different ways. So first responders, not only are they going to rise up to the call, and of course they're going to do their work, but many of the people that we were calling for overtime shifts or calling to come in and can you respond were impacted by the flood. So one of the things we did early on in the plan was to incorporate our critical incident stress management team directly into our emergency operations center, which is fairly revolutionary in the emergency management world, because usually that's an afterthought. It's after the event. We put it in right at the beginning so that we could actually reach out to our staff early on and say, we're expecting you to come in tonight for night shift. Are you available? And they would have that conduit to be able to say, I'm not. My house is destroyed, or I can't find X, Y, and Z. I can't get into work. I'm surrounded, or I'm helping in the community. Is there another way I can help out? And we had to support that as well. So there's layers of planning. What went wrong is I would say it's, well, you could call it an act of God or whatever it was. It was a catastrophic event that we didn't have a lot of time to ramp up for. Some other events in an emergency world, we have some time to ramp up for. We have, if someone just calls us for a cardiac arrest, we have 10 minutes to drive there, and in your mind, as a first responder, you can get ready for that. This is something that's atypical for any paramedic. We don't respond en masse to a hospital and say, can you evacuate this entire hospital? When we have surgeries going on, we have people in ICU, we have people that are breathing or not breathing. How do you stop surgery and evacuate that patient even though they're losing power? So logistically, it was extremely difficult. The other thing that went wrong for us was a lack of understanding, I guess, between the role of EMS and the role of other entities. Maybe it was a lack of understanding. Maybe it was just more, we never practiced it, so we didn't know. So, for example, if we would show up to a nursing home on the Bow River that needs to be evacuated, at one point we had 19 ambulances lined up ready to evacuate this nursing home. And obviously there was more people than 19, but how many people can walk and how many people can't walk? And we really had to figure out the role of EMS is for the stretcher and wheelchair bound patients or survivors of any large scale event. And that was an ad hoc decision. We didn't pre-plan that with the cities or pre-plan that with transportation. We just knew that people needed to move, and how many resources do we have versus can we bring in municipal buses and bring the walking wounded out and treat people appropriately. So that was a lot of ad hoc decision making and learning on the fly what our respective roles are. So I'm not sure that went wrong, but it was definitely a good lesson learned and a hard lesson learned, because those are conversations we probably could have had prior to, but you really have to use your imagination to say, okay, if there's this gigantic event, fire, what are you going to do? Police, what are you going to do? And EMS, what is your role? What are you resourced to do?
How do you keep talking to each other?
Yeah, and not only that, 911 services carry on regardless of a flood or a tornado or a fire, right? So of course, people still have heart attacks, people are still having babies, and we still need to respond. So even though we're putting all of these resources into evacuating a hospital or a nursing home, emergencies still occur. So we need to balance the two realities, and we only have so many resources. So we brought on new resources, but that day, but definitely that balance is difficult.
Scott, that's the sort of just a really good encapsulation of what some of the challenges were on a macro level, at a systems level. Chris, you were drilling down to this space, this room. So give me a sense of what the challenges were for you and your staff to sort of post that picture. What was the next week like? What was the next month like?
Hello. Oh. The next month was, the next week was basically Jeff, myself, the chef, working these pumps. And so that was the first 4 days, day and night, just going straight, just pumping water out, drinking it as it geysered into your face. Then thinking about the staff, that was a big issue. What are we going to do with all these employees we have? So many different restaurants reached out to us. We tried to place as many as, we have other places like Mercado, and we have Mercado West, and we had affiliation with the garage. So we tried to house a lot of our staff at these different locations. Stampede coming up, a lot of other places reached out to us for if we could give them or lend them our staff for that occasion. So, that was a massive concern for us of okay, like, we got to take care of these people, and how are we going to take care of them? So, yeah, all that, and then, a massive turning point for us here was when the fire department stepped in. We had no power, so our sub pump wasn't working. So we would pump water out, and then we'd come back the next day. and it would have risen another 3 feet or 4 feet. So the fire department just came in, like day 4 or day 5, and they just looked at where the water was coming from, which was our sub pump and sewage, and they're like, you guys are done here. We're taking this over, and they commandeered we had an HVAC truck that just came, and 2 of them were on rotation, and they were sucking water 24/7 for the next 5 days. And this one HVAC guy lived in Discovery Ridge, and so he would work here all night, and then he'd go home and help his neighborhood out. And, it's just, God, wow, it seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
It
And
really
probably
does.
a good thing it does.
And it, I got to say, it was controlled chaos, and there wasn't a lot of finger pointing, which I'm very proud of. Everyone just rallied and worked together and got through it.
You're right. There wasn't a lot of finger pointing, especially in that cauldron at the front end. But at the same time, and I think Emma's spoken to this a little bit, and to some extent Scott, systems were in place and needed to be activated to make things work, to make things right, to get us to a year later. What have been some of the frustrations for you, Emma, in working with your group and navigating the sort of rabbit's warren of government policy and
Right.
communications?
Government is interesting, to say the least.
That's tweetable.
Yeah. The big thing is, I think there was a huge, government wanted to do the right thing right away, right? So everybody wanted to find a solution and institute policies that were going to be, that are going to make Calgary, you hear the mayor speak of this all the time. We need to make Calgary more resilient. We need to do, we need to do land use bylaw planning that's going to make it easier for people to live here. But a lot of these policies were sort of knee-jerk reactions that then hadn't sort of, in my mind, been thought out within the larger context and framework of, well, what's the big picture here, right? And then
So give me an example of that.
Well, things like, for me, the floodway buyout policy, right? Like, the floodway buyout policy, basically, the government came out and said, okay, we're going to, if your home is in the floodway, there's different categorizations. There's the flood fringe, and then there's floodway. Floodway is where the water runs fast and deep. So technically, the floodway has about, I think there's about 25 homes, let's say in the city of Calgary, that are in the floodway. So the government came out and said, okay, if you're in the floodway, we're going to buy out your house, and we're going to tear it down, but it's optional, right? So we're going to give you the option to have your house bought, but you will never be entitled to any more money ever again, and then we're going to institute policy and land use changes that mean that you can't ever build here again. Now the problem with this policy is, I think that the fact that it was made optional, right? Because if you make it optional and people don't take it, you're actually not achieving your policy directive of clearing the floodway,
Sure.
right? So you're going to have, what happens is, and what has happened, is that you have gaps in the neighborhood. So you've got a street, and this house has been bought out, and then that house hasn't been bought out. The other problem with it was the deep inequity that existed between neighbors on one side of the street getting $2 million basically because they live in a big house on the river, and the guy across the street is reliant then on DRP funding, and DRP funding might give him $50,000 maybe, and this is someone who's had their entire main floor wiped out, right, and who suffered probably equal amounts of damage. So my thing with that policy was we were saying, well, look, you've exempted Drumheller and Fort Mac from this policy because all of Drumheller happens to be in a floodway, as does all of the Walmarts in Fort Mac. So
There are more than one Walmart.
well,
in Fort
whatever,
Mac.
there's a big
I know what you mean.
there's a big mall, right, with the Home Depot. It's all in the floodway. So government had made this exemption there, and then on the other side, and so I thought, well, you know what? Why don't you actually just exempt urban city of Calgary from this? Because we all know that we need to take steps to mitigate the problem anyway, right? Because in my mind, and one of my favorite little tools here is, and I should have brought it, was, so back in 1879 and 1897, Calgary had a flood that was 35% more than what we had this year. So that volume is enormous, that's just catastrophic, right? We thought that was catastrophic, that is catastrophic, because what we superimpose those volumes onto downtown Calgary today, it basically wipes out the core, right? So it takes out all of these towers, and this isn't some fantasized risk that exists sort of in what we think. This is actually historical fact that we've seen happen before. So that's what Calgary could have. So my attitude to this has always been, we need to get these mitigation structures in place. I know people say you can't engineer your way out of the problem, but you can actually engineer your way out of quite a bit of the problem, right? So, I mean, and that's what's happened in Winnipeg, right? Like when we look back and look at the bypass that they put in place
After
there.
97, after the-
Yeah, well, no, before that. I think it was in the 50s or 60s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Duff's Ditch, it's called. And they mocked him ridiculously for building this thing, and they said, oh, it costs too much money. Well, I think over the years they found it saved Winnipeg $32 billion, right? So really that's been my push is, let's look at the big picture here, and then and then after the big picture is done, let's drive back, right? Because maybe what you're going to do is you're going to have different land use bylaws and framing that are going to exist around, we know that mitigation structures are in place, so we know that maybe you're flood fringe but protected by mitigation, so there's a different sort of policy objective. These are sort of the frustrations that you work through, right?
You must be pretty happy in your organization to have a lawyer who's a realtor and that can take on the government all in one person. That's pretty good.
Well, no, we have an amazing team. I've got Brenda Leeds Binder, one of my favorite people in the world. She's an engineer and a patent lawyer.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, and she's a very good bad cop.
If you're the good cop and she's the bad cop, look out.
Yeah,
That's us.
no, really. Yeah, and no, we've got a couple other lawyers on board. We've got some business people. We've got it's just been an incredible. I basically found all the smartest people that I could.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Chris, I want to ask you, because Emma's talking in a sort of wider policy way. I mean, this happened 100 years ago. It happened 365 days ago. Maybe it's coming again. Who knows? Hopefully not. What's changed in this operation if it does happen again? What would be different next time for WURST?
Well, we have access to power above ground level now, where we can have our sub pump working. We just have to plug it into a generator. So we'll have that. Definitely, there's been some work in our storm drains and whatnot, but we're in a vulnerable spot. I think if it were to happen again, we'd be in a lot of trouble still. So, do I have another rebuild in me? I don't feel like I do, but given the moment, I'm sure closing our doors won't be an option.
How long were you closed?
6 months to the day.
6 months to the day.
So, and we were one of the fast ones.
Yeah.
We were definitely, I think Earls and the Joyce on 4th were probably 2 months, a little over 2 months behind us. So, you had that moment of, and I stress it was just a moment of, I just want to go crawl in a cave and just hide. And then it was like, okay, how are we going to get through this? And just rally and roll up the sleeves and get to work. And, it wasn't easy rebuilding, I'll tell you that. Getting the permits and getting the inspections, and it wasn't an easy process. They weren't treating us like we were flood victims. They were treating us like we were a new business. And so, this is a new space. It was only 2 years old when the flood happened. And the red tape that we had to go through in the rebuild process of getting our inspections and whatnot, it was tough. So, we got through it though. And we are fortunate. We're well taken care of through insurance and stuff. We're blessed because we're well taken care of. And there's a lot of other businesses and a lot of other people that had it a lot worse than us. And I'm really happy that it's dry and we're open.
Yeah.
And you make great pastries, hey? Yeah.
That's Rudy. Rudy, our chef, he's phenomenal.
Yes, amazing. Scott, from a systems perspective, Scott, how nimble would you say? I mean, when we think of, I've done some projects with Alberta Health Services, sometimes it's a little tough to move the needle and get things done with big bureaucracies. How nimble have you felt the system that you're a part of has been when something is interjected as dramatic as what happened last year. How ready and able have you been to change and adapt as a system?
Well, I might actually ask you to separate Alberta Health Services a little bit from EMS, because we're new to the AHS family.
Sure.
We started in 2009. Prior to that, we were all across the provinces. We're run by municipalities or whatever the case may be.
You're saying don't blame us, blame them.
No, not at all. No, what I'm saying is we've always had a public safety responder mentality. We work and we continue to work closely with fire, police, and EMS. That's the tri-services responders. So EMS has always been very nimble. We're always able to adapt quite quickly. And you're right. In an organization of 100,000 plus employees, being Alberta Health Services, it's much more difficult to make things change. But one of the mantras that are, I guess, our mission statement in preparedness when I was in that role was we always toted this one mission statement. It was that EMS must be able to respond to events regardless of scale to deliver rapid and effective patient care across Alberta. And the one piece that in there that is really important is the regardless of scale, because we always believe that, or I believe, and was able to promote this thought that the public doesn't necessarily care if they're calling 911 for a broken leg, or they're calling 911 because a plane just crashed in their backyard. They expect and deserve rapid and efficient care regardless of scale. So that was a big mind shift that I had to sell within Alberta Health Services and preparedness and EMS, because they said, well, we're in emergency services, we're always prepared. The issue is that preparedness funding in governments, and we talked about it earlier, is the adults that are supposed to be running the show. Preparedness funding is not popular. When you have your budget discussions and you say, okay, we're gonna build this new hospital, we're gonna build this road, we want 18 new ambulances, and someone else comes to the table and says, well, what if we put like $400,000 or $1 million into preparedness? Well, what are you gonna do with that? Well, we're gonna train people so that when an event happens, like a tornado touches down or a flood happens, then our staff, our paramedics and EMTs are gonna know what to do. Well, yeah, we'll get to that, but let's talk about the shiny new hospital and the 18 new ambulances. It's not popular, so it's very difficult to prepare in an environment where capital funding is much more popular than preparedness funding and operating budget to keep people trained and ready to respond when you hit that button.
We've got about 10 minutes left. I know it is Friday on a very sunny day, but we have jobs, even in social media. So I'm going to open it up to see if there's any questions that might have arisen from the topic. If you've got a question, just let me know. Guy in the hat at the back. Actually, do you mind popping up and just grabbing the microphone so everybody can hear? You've got a good hat. We want to see that. Come on up. Right here. We'll share the mic with Chris here. There you go. More kid.
Sorry. My question I posted up here, what should we be talking about going forward? Because it's great to have this reflection point, but I think there's got to be a point where we need to go a little bit forward with the conversation.
All right, so in that, Emma, go ahead. What do you think, what should we be considering as we move forward into the year after?
Well, for me, it comes down to how do we live in this watershed? When you ask the question, will it happen again? And the 1 in 100 years ago this happened. What's interesting is we've got tree ring data that goes back 500 years now. And so we haven't lived here for very long, right? Like we've only lived in Calgary for 100 and plus years, right? That we've been like a city. So we don't actually understand what our watershed is like and what our climate is like here. And so when we look at the data 500 years ago, we can say, oh my God, we go through these cycles of wet and drought, and they last like 60 or some years. So we had this cycle of wet from 1876 to 1932, where we had like 10 floods. And then we did all of our development post that, right? So we did all of our development in this period of drought. And so that is what our climate here really is. I mean, then we don't even need to factor in sort of whether we want to talk about global warming right now at all, because we can actually historically say, these are the influences that are on our climate. So what we need to do is figure out how do we live in this watershed and manage for both drought and for flood. And that's why some of these mitigation projects, when they're looking at the ones that they're building, will also have storage capability for when we experience perhaps severe droughts like what they just went through in California. We also have to look at the way we redevelop in our watershed. We have to look at things like, do we build permeable, what are we constructing, not just necessarily in the floodplain, but everywhere else? And how are we, how is the land able to absorb the water? And what are we doing around the rivers? And how do we, do we need to completely change our framework of thinking about that? So these have been, and also just the web of it, right? Like the watershed is, whenever you look at, well, maybe you can build a berm here or build a berm there or build this structure. It's such, everything's connected. So what we do here has impact upstream and downstream, and you can't ever say, you can't pit community against community. So we have to find holistic solutions that work for, that really work for the entire province, and then also manage what our broader relationships are with all of the jurisdictions around us as well. It's a massive undertaking.
It's interesting that you frame things in that sort of multi-jurisdictional, wider way, because I think one of the criticisms, I'll just be honest, one of the criticisms I heard early on about your group and about people was, they're a bunch of rich people with really big houses and they're really mad that it flooded.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be where your head's at all.
No. I mean, our head's at, we flooded, and we sort of then were dealing with the immediate reaction of what this was. The other thing is too, the people who have actually been most impacted by this flood, in my mind, are seniors in this community. Seniors are the people who do not, like as Chris talked about, the energy that it takes to rebuild, and they are still out of their homes. Like I think I actually told you earlier on, we were talking about Frank King, and I don't know if any of you remember Frank King. So Frank King actually was the guy who brought the Olympics to the city of Calgary. He had this bungalow in East Elbow Park that he and his wife had lived in for years and years and years. One of the original houses in the area. Like it's a nice, big, beautiful home. But it's not fancy or whatever. Anyway, the whole thing got wiped out. Main floor damage. It sits empty to this day. He lost all of the Olympic memorabilia, like everything. So the whole
Frank, for those of you who might not remember, I was here at that time. Frank King was Mr. Olympics. If anybody had memorabilia, it's this guy.
Yeah, he brought the Olympics to the city of Calgary and created that, And so here's a guy who, a year from now, I had coffee with him yesterday. So a year from now, or from the flood, he's still living in a condo. He still hasn't made a decision as to what to do with his home. He and his wife just don't have the energy to cope, and they're still trying to decide, what do we do? And he's actually coping pretty well with that situation. But there's so many other seniors who just, like, they've lost the homes that they raised their families in, and they're the ones that haven't been able to, they're the ones that really have got stuck. But yeah, I know everybody thinks it's about the reality is, though, the economic consequences, and that's why I'm going to this meeting downtown in the chamber, the economic consequences of this happening again, which if we look at this cyclical nature of things, is perhaps a very real possibility within the next 5 to 10 years. It could happen next year. I mean, last night people were, wondering if it was going to happen again this year. So the economic consequences of that to the city of Calgary are unfathomable, right? And so that's why we need to take whatever steps we can, and we need to do it sooner rather than later.
Chris, you said something interesting earlier where you said that you didn't feel like at some points in navigating the system that you felt like a victim, which you were, but you felt like a startup, somebody that was now. Do you trust that if this happens again, and whatever way you're affected, that you'd have the wherewithal? You're a young guy, you've got a young team. You're not a senior, but this is tough going, right?
Definitely, a personal perspective, I think for me, I just have to look at it. It's just a story now. And I can't hang on to this story. It's something that happened, and you need to acknowledge that and learn from it. But you got to move forward. And I can't worry about if it's going to flood next year or the year after. It's a possible reality, but I just know from my experience that how big of a scale this a flood would be, or any catastrophe happening here again. We will get through it. We did, and we will again. And you can't hang on to your story and let it define you or dictate the way you live. It's a story, and that's all it is now. And we need to move on and live in the moment.
That's a great way to end, but I'm gonna let Scott have the last word. And for everybody in here, one simple question. If something happens again, if something big, something traumatic, something catastrophic happens again, and we call 911, are we good? Good. We're good. All right. That's all.